the world's #1 podcasting platform for African stories. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's panel on Africa Podcast Day. We're really excited to have these three amazing gentlemen here with me today. We have Mwafreeka from Iko Nini in Kenya. We have Joseph from Sincerely Accra in Ghana. And we have Tonio, a sandwich podcast. Gentlemen, please say hi to everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Perfect. So today's panel is going to be about telling stories in African languages, and we're going to focus on slang specifically. Each of you in your podcast has found a way to introduce or to include your local language in your speaking. But before we go into that, I would like to allow you to introduce yourself. And the way I like to do it is introduce yourself as if you're introducing yourself to someone who does not know anything about you. So Mwafreeka, I'll start with you, then I'll go to Joseph, then I'll go to Tonio. Mwafreeka, how would you introduce yourself to someone who's not heard about you?
Okay, my name is Mwafreeka, which is Swahili for African. This name came up because someone used to joke about me and say, you love hip hop like you're an American and you're just an African. So I decided to grab that African name and run with it. So yeah, so my name is Mwafreeka. We have the double E in the spelling to show that I'm always free. I always express my thoughts. And that's what Iko Nini is. Iko Nini is a phrase in Sheng that people use at the end of a statement just to show that I said what I said. So yeah, so that's the whole attitude behind Iko Nini, which is a podcast that started in the year 2021. And this year we turn 3 years old in May. Yes, in May we are turning 3 years old. So yeah, that's basically it. About Mwafreeka, my background was I started out as a rapper, then worked in the media for around maybe 10 years in the media, and then now came to this other space. This is still media, but now a whole different new media space. Yeah, so that's basically Mwafreeka.
My name is Joseph Inti. I am the host of the Sincerely Accra podcast. I've been doing this for 7 years this year. We started, 7 years ago. I first got interested in hosting a podcast when I got invited to be on a podcast. I started out in the creative space back in uni. I was the editor-in-chief for the magazine, Campus Magazine. And when I finished school, I started to do documentaries. And then I started an online show on YouTube. It was called Off the Top. It was a trivia show. So I got invited onto a podcast to talk about that show. And when I was leaving the studio, I was just very interested in the whole thing. And so I had a friend back then, Kwame, who's the co-creator of the Sincerely Accra podcast and also the producer. You know, we spoke about it, and 7 years down the line, this is what we're doing so far.
Well, my name is Tonio Kibbs. My real government names are Tony Kibet. So it's just a different rendition of that. So actually I'm a funny guy. I'm kind of a comedian. Yeah, I shoot funny skits. That's what I do for fun. And now there's also this side where I have a podcast with my friends called the Sandwich Podcast. So yeah, definitely one of the biggest podcasts from Kenya. And yeah, we've just been doing our thing since 2020. So yeah, during COVID, just when COVID was just ending, that's when we started, because I mean, it was either that or we go back to school. So there was kind of yeah, so we had to go really hard. So yeah, and basically we kind of did it. Yeah, we are here now, and our audience is basically young guys from all the way from 18 to 25, 28 rather. Then also they are like more than that when it comes to the age. So yeah, that's basically about me and the Sandwich Podcast.
Amazing. The coveted Gen Z are your audience. Just for anyone listening, we're not saying don't go to school. It's just it worked for you and his squad. So that's not what he's saying. As I mentioned earlier, we want to have a conversation about telling stories in African languages, specifically slang, because what we have seen in the podcasting space is a lot of people feel like it's exclusively for the middle class, classy people and all of that. So we're trying to make it feel a bit more inclusive because it is based on who you are and how long you've been doing it. Joseph in the game for 7 years, Mwafreeka since 2021, Tonio since 2020. That's a lot of time to have been in the game. So I wanted to find out from you and how you have chosen to represent your podcast. How important is authenticity in the representation of your local dialects when you're speaking your podcast? So how important is it that Mwafreeka is who he is when he's speaking? I'll start with Tonio because I started with you last time.
Yeah. So basically that's our identity, and the reason why we speak how we speak is because we were trying to make it to come as close to home as possible. Because now you see when you go outside, let's say you're just walking in town in Kenya, Nairobi city, good sunlight, everything, you'll hear guys speaking exactly the way we talk. So we are just trying to bring it as home as possible. So that's why we speak that way. We put the sheng, and it's also Kiswahili has English, just a mixture of all that. Because if you had a conversation even the next door, you in Kenya, you that's exactly how we sound. So yeah, and it's actually worked for us because guys really relate to us. That's the sound, like that's the sound on the ground. So it's really been very, very, very crucial.
I guess I'll just say the same thing that Tonio said. Like for us, when we started the podcast, we didn't think like we are authentic. It was just like we are in Kenya and people in Kenya speak like this. So you just switch on the camera, switch on the microphone, and speak like a Kenyan. And then now the surprising thing has been now Kenyans in the diaspora actually relating to the show because I expected it to be this really Kenyan thing. So when someone tells you, I'm listening to you from Australia, I'm listening from Japan, then you're like, hey, then that's when the authenticity thing comes in. Because then you're like, because you hear people telling you, I listen to you because they remind me of home. Yeah, you make me remember home. Yeah, such things. But when we are starting out, we didn't feel like that was the reason why we are using the language. That's why you'll even find within the podcast, and I'm sure this also happens with Sandwich, is you'll find with some guests we just do English, with other guests we do Sheng. So it depends with the situation and the time, because that's how the average Kenyan navigates the streets. When we're talking to girls, we'll use English. Talking to boys, use Sheng. So it's even us with the guests. Female guests will lean more to English. Male guests will lean more to Sheng. So yeah, I think that's basically that's how it ended up happening. So for anyone who does not understand Sheng, Sheng is a mixture of Swahili, English, and then local dialects, and that's like the most common street language in Kenya, and that's what we use. So, but using it, we just did it because it was a Kenyan thing, not because we wanted to be authentic.
Oh, that is very amazing that you would. I find it very interesting that for the women you speak in English.
Yeah,
That's
it's just it happens. Even I'm sure Tonio would also say the same. Like it happens subconsciously. You see a girl, you speak in English. You see a dude, is like, "Hey, niaje buda, hey, tukunaenda." You see, so it's just the Kenyan way. It's been there for generations. Yeah, but once in a while you'll find a ghetto girl. You know, like King Kalala. That's ghetto. But then, yeah, Shik's Kapienga, ghetto. But the rest, unajipataga tu kizungu. You just find yourself in English. I don't know how it happens, but it just happens. Yeah.
interesting. And Joseph, what about you from your perspective in Ghana? Because we have two Kenyans here. What is it like on importance of authenticity?
For me, I grew up watching a lot of television. So there were a lot of TV and radio presenters that I kind of like idolized. And you know, back then, the media landscape was very well rehearsed, very formal. You know, you don't even share your opinion as much as we do now. You have to be a very, you know, TV ready. Everything was very formal, right? And then, as I was growing up, I started to watch the Wendy Williams show. Okay, it's an American show, the Wendy Williams show. And the way Wendy's show is, it's very raw. You know, she doesn't pretend to have all the notes. She doesn't pretend to have everything ready. So she would always make mistakes. She had people behind the camera who would like correct her, and I found that to be very entertaining because she was just, you know, being herself. So what happened was when we started a podcast, all of the things that I had been training myself to do, because I've always wanted to be in the media space, you know, speak professionally and all of that, it kind of changed. And I wanted to just infuse a lot more of my personality. And me in my everyday life, I switch between English, Tree, and Ga. So Tree and Ga are local languages that we speak here. Tree we spoken by the Akans, and Ga is spoken by the Gas. So I switch between them, and that's just how it is for me when I'm talking. And so that's what I do on the podcast. I don't think that we really set out to try and be authentic Ghanaians or in any way. It was just to showcase the personality that is talking to you, and that's just how I speak. And just like the last Iko Nini, I forgot your name, said, we found out that after a couple of years, a lot of Ghanaians living in the diaspora would say, I like listening to the podcast because it reminds me of home. I like it when you speak the local language. It reminds me of home. There's nobody here that I can speak the local language with. So, I mean, that was good feedback, and we just kept it. And for those who say they don't understand, sometimes I try to do an English translation every time I say something in a non-English language, but it's not all the time.
I understand that sometimes things are lost in translation if you try and translate them. So a lot of people, when it comes to languages in podcasting, will say, why don't you use like English because it excludes people? What's your thoughts on exclusivity, or does your podcast exclude people, do you feel, from being a part of your audience? Joseph, you can go first.
Well, I always say this. Whenever you watch American television, if you watch British television, it's English they speak. They really do not think about the fact that, it's a global world and somebody from a different country could be watching it. So they don't put Chinese subtitles or, they do their thing in English. And you even realize that for most of us, Africans, we have to pick up on some of the slang. We have to learn some of it. When an American says that's cap, what does that mean? Oh, it means you're lying. We bother ourselves to learn their expressions and their jargons because we consume their content, and we don't want to be watching their content and not understand what they mean. And so for me, the reverse is what I do. I don't feel the need to kind of explain too much what I'm saying, because I mean, ideally, we're making content for Ghanaians everywhere in the world, right? Anyone else that comes on, yeah, it's good for you to listen to as well, but maybe also find a Ghanaian friend to educate you. Hey, what does it mean when they say this? Because obviously it's not full tree or Gan. There's English in there for you to understand. So you can also pick up on our jargons. And if you go somewhere and you use it, you say, oh yeah, I listen to a Ghanaian podcast. That's why I know what this means. So that's why I say that. Because we do the same thing for American and British shows. We're learning their stuff because they don't really, you know what I mean? So I don't think we really exclude anybody, but we just want Ghanaians, no matter where you are, to enjoy the show. And like I said, when people living in that diaspora say, oh, I like listening to it because it reminds me of home, that's something that's important for us.
Yeah, Tonio, Mwafreeka, do you agree? The same, you have different views on exclusivity?
Well, I don't think it does, because now even when we are making our content and our podcast, we're basically doing it that way because that's the people who can relate actually just speak like us. But also it can also cross the borders, because now with art is now like it's an international language. So someone else might see this, they may even not get what you're saying. Like, we've watched series and movies in Spanish and we prefer them in Spanish and just read them, the subtitles, because it's really interesting. So if we just do our thing the way, because that's the best way we can do it. So if we just keep at it, it can even cross the borders. So we still maintain our thing. So I just feel like it still gets the people that even still don't understand our language. Yeah.
I'd say about the exclusivity thing, I've seen it in the comments, like a few people who, because now the weird thing with us, I don't know if we do it subconsciously or what, but we speak in Sheng, but we title our episodes in English. It's just been happening since episode 1, and we just ran with it. But you'll find like an episode is called The Price of Betrayal and what, and as soon as you enter, hey, Iko Nini good, so it's like we're speaking the language. So once in a while you'll find someone in the comments, like we did a video about that Kenyan fugitive, Kevin Kang'ethe, the one that's wanted in the US. And it seems like the algorithm pushed it past Kenya. So I saw a few comments there. People are asking like, why is the title in English and you're speaking a language we can't understand? So that will always be there. But now you have to look at the whole thing. Like, yes, the show is called Iko Nini. So the people who will see the name and relate to it are most probably going to be Kenyans, and they'll run with it, because it's interesting. Like when I heard Joseph say that he's not remembering the name Mwafreeka, and now I can maybe teach him a Swahili lesson and tell him, hey Joseph, you're a Mwafreeka. He's like, yeah, because Mwafreeka is Swahili for African. You see, so but now you come to the realization that Africa is that big, that a name that in East Africa we know what it means. Like if anyone saw Joseph, they'll be like, when in Mwafreeka. But him, he'd be like, what do you mean by that? So I feel like if you try to include everyone, it will be impossible. So it's just like the few people who relate to it, run with it. Do I feel sometimes like I wish I had an English podcast? Yes, it's something I've thought about. Because one of my favorite podcasts is Mark G, the Mark G podcast and chill. So sometimes when I'm watching it, I'm there like, I wish I could give my opinion about this same thing to an African audience, because my opinion is super different because of this and this. So yeah, there are those times, but other times it's just Iko Nini. You have to be accepted home before you're accepted outside home. So you're trying to get accepted here first.
It's very interesting that you said you have to be accepted at home first, because a lot of times I feel like people are chasing the audience, and I think it's important to remember that the audience is available exactly where you are. Start at home, get your audience, and like each of them has said, it ends up growing to someone who you never thought you'd get in Australia, Japan, wherever it is, who's like, oh, I listened to your podcast. Tonio, you brought up something interesting where you were talking about subtitles. So I'm wondering, because when it comes to Spanish and all of these things, we have the ability to add what the subtitle should be into whatever language you have. What would you tell the people who are creating transcription about including our languages?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, that side of transcribing, the transcription part will now become a whole industry on itself because of such kind of things, because when we have good content, it might be so good, people may be curious, like, Kwani, what's going on? So the transcribing part will really help to make everyone like just be on the look, because from someone's reaction, if it's visual, from someone's reaction, you can really tell how they were. And then also the same thing when it's audio, there are people who now do it in a different way for you to understand. So it's definitely even opening a new other industry. So, but it will definitely take time. I've seen people use AI right now to try to transcribe, and it's not really accurate, especially when you find now we're speaking something like Sheng. It will be like, so it's still something that is growing, but I feel like, yeah, that side of it is really becoming something.
Interesting. So new jobs for everyone who's listening in podcasting. You don't always have to be the creator. Mwafreeka, Joseph, anything to add to that on inclusivity using transcription?
Not really. I feel like for a podcaster, we already deal with so much. Like you have to speak for this very long period. To add transcription to that, unless it's independently someone else is doing it, yeah, that would be good. But at CC as Iko Nini, we are like, whoever listens, like if we can get that East African audience, because if we to even maybe digress like a little bit and look at Tanzania, for example, their music industry is much bigger than us. And you look at them, they're like strictly Swahili. As we mix Swahili, English, and we still, so it just shows you how big that Eastern Africa audience is. And most of them are learning Swahili. We hope the rest of Africa can listen to, what's his name, Malema, who was saying, teach Swahili to the whole of Africa. Then we'd have Joseph learning Swahili and listening to. So yeah, but that's it. Like I feel like the fact that also podcasts are best like consumed through audio more than subtitles, I feel like it's hard to include everyone. Sometimes when I'm listening to Mark G, they speak in those South African languages and they don't even translate it, but I still keep watching because majority of it is in English. Yes.
Interesting. Okay. And then in using your phrases as you speak, how do you choose which ones to include and which ones not to? Because I know when you're speaking to Kenyans, or like Mwafreeka said, sometimes you have to adjust the version of you depending on who your audience is. How do you decide how to do that when you're creating your podcast?
For me, I think it just comes, as I said, naturally. It comes without thinking about it. It's just part of you. Like we've always known, for most of us, we've always known that when you're speaking to your boys, just sheng, just like unless it's someone from uptown. If it's someone from uptown, you have to switch to English. So that also happens. Like I had an artist like Kagwe Mongai, who's he's not. You'll try and speak to him in English and just push it to sheng. So with him, we end up going the sheng way. But then if you have, I think the girls thing has just been part of us where you knew like if you are there's a certain level of girl that if you want you have to speak in English, alafu kuna hao wengine wa ghetto where you speak in Sheng, but then now you find like girls also are very aspirational, so them they end up even does not matter where they came from, they'll end up leaning more towards English than Sheng. So that's just how it happens. So it happens like when we switch on the mic, we start talking. I normally start with Sheng. I'll start if someone goes the English route, I just go with them. Yes. Once in a while, I'll throw in one or two Swahili words. Like even when I did a few interviews with like an Indian comedian, so I'd still throw in a few Swahili words because he understands Swahili, but he's just not very comfortable in expressing himself. But in English, he's 100% comfortable. And as a podcaster, you're trying to create the most interesting show possible. And now get what is your guest comfortable with? Run with that.
Okay, Joseph, for you, how do you decide the terms or phrases to use in your content?
It's pretty much the same. I don't think that we ever, outline things that can be said and things that cannot be said. Sometimes when you are speaking and you even want to express yourself or the reactions that you have to certain things as Africans, it differs, hey, wow, hey, oh, all of those things, they just come naturally. And so when you are saying certain things, you're not really planning, So we say it, and then if I feel maybe it's a bit more very advanced, it's a kind of thing that if you're not Ghanaian, you're not gonna know. I will just do a quick explanation, but that's not always top of mind, So sometimes you actually find people, especially during Christmas, when a lot of people come down to Ghana. If I run into people who are not Ghanaian and they say they listen to the podcast, they will literally have kept a word that I said and say, "What does this mean?" I'm like, "Wow, how long have you been walking around with that?" So we don't really have specific things, or just like he said, it flows. When it switches to English, it switches to English. But I mean, for me, I do start off speaking English. The local language is more of like a minority in my speaking, but it is mainly English. And then, actually speaking about subtitles, when we speak our local languages, as the subtitles are actually written in the local languages as well. We don't explain it in English so that they actually have to learn how to read our local languages too. Yeah.
I like that. Learn the local languages is the story that you're learning here today. So a lot of people will say that using your local languages will limit the ability for your podcast to monetize. I know Sincerely Accra has had live shows. I know Sandwich has had live shows. Mwafreeka, I believe you've had some as well. I know each of you is making some sort of money. What would you say to that person who says your language matters in how you monetize?
I don't think it matters because it's a game of numbers, yes. So if you can appeal to the most numbers, you make money. So it goes back to what I was saying. Like if you look at Kenyan music right now, like some of the artists doing the biggest numbers are rappers, like rapping in Sheng. You see, like I had an interview with this producer called Viquest, and Viquest was telling me of how his song, the Kuna Kuna, was one of the fastest songs to reach 20 million views. Yes? And after reaching 20 million views, there's a time that Yemi Alade was visiting Kenya, and she was told that this is the biggest song, and she jumped on the remix. You see, like it's an unreleased remix. She didn't understand the language, she didn't understand the word, but she knew the vibe. She understood, like I don't know, they call it vibration. So when you look at that, it means that language does not matter as long as there's someone who's relating to it. I don't feel like you can sit down and start worrying about a global audience, because I feel like even the podcasts that have a global audience are mostly American podcasts, because when it comes to the entertainment circle, America is the godfather or the what. So you'll find Club Shay Shay, Cat Williams doing 50 million views. You'll find what's his name, Joe Rogan, doing such ridiculous views. But if you go outside that, I think the next big podcast would be Shits and Gigs, and that's a British podcast. But apart from those, is there any other podcast outside America that's big, like that huge? I don't think so. So you'd have to just cater for your local audience. Don't worry about the global audience, because even with the local audiences, like I was saying, someone like Mark G, I'd say arguably that's the biggest podcast in Africa, if I'm not wrong. Maybe Tonio and Joseph feel different. I don't know if there's another bigger podcast than that. So with them, it's a very South African podcast. Like when you listen to it, sometimes you just get lost, because they go into the whole thing and you're there just wondering why are they clicking, and they're talking, they're communicating. So I don't feel like it's anything to do with
So for me, I feel like the thing that's actually working for us and how I see it is having a community. It's more about having your own kind of people, your people who get it, people who understand the vibe, because now the community keeps on growing. It's not there's a day that will reach that you see that our community is getting smaller, as long as we keep on going and everything. In fact, when we do a live event, a live show, in fact, we are going to do one soon. We could even not market it outside, just use our podcast and still get our numbers. Like the event will definitely always be full, because I've seen the numbers on my end, and I've seen the consistency in the numbers, and I'm sure that's the community. So like we're just also right now trying to find now a place where when guys meet, they'll be like, I get this, you get this. It's the vibe. So for me, it's more about the community and how the community is growing. So it's really important, because even more could add on this, because I've seen they have this kind of subscriptions on other platforms that people can, yeah. Most of those people who can subscribe to you are basically your audience, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe you could add on that, like how you see the audience, especially the people who are consistently there trying to tell you, hey, Mwaf, nearly feel.
Yeah. We have that because, as I was saying, like even when you look at the monetization, you have to ask yourself, what is monetization? Like, does the money have to come from YouTube for you to feel like you are monetized? Or does it, as long as we're making the money, it doesn't matter where it's coming from? So with us, of course, we have YouTube members, we have Patreon, but apart from that, we have these fans who always give you gifts. So I don't know, the sandwich come na kwa guy, like you're the same. Sorry, Joseph, sometimes we switch to Swahili. So I don't know if even
Happens
I'm
naturally.
assuming, yes, I'm assuming even Sincerely Accra is the same. Like even this microphone that I'm using, this is a fan that bought the microphone. He had us talking about microphones, and he was like, you know what, I'm going to give you this mic. After that fan gave us the mic, another one was like, I'm going to give you an exact same mic. So to me, that's monetization, because now you're using a $200 microphone that you never bought. So, but it's like you also bought it because you worked for it. So I feel like that's monetization in its own way. So I don't feel like language affects. It's the human connection that affects monetization. Like you need YouTube wants you to connect with at least 500 people and make sure that these 500 people come to you every once in a while. But if you are, so after now you get all this, you can find maybe a YouTuber that has 200,000 subscribers and there's zero connection. They did one video, went viral. There was the euphoric subscription and it ended there. But with podcasts, mostly you find like it's a community. You find there are people who, yes, there are fans who invite us for dinner. We go for dinner. We just hang out. And this is someone we didn't know like before we started the podcast. So I feel like it's more about community when it comes to podcasts than just yeah.
Because of globalization, sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that the whole world must know us and hear us. And the reality, just like the guys have said, the reality is if you're not in the American markets, you just you probably won't get as big, but it doesn't mean you're going to be successful. And community is so important. You know, as Sincerely Accra, one of the things that we do is we reply every single comment, whether it's on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, reply every single comment, because if somebody takes their time, I mean, except the negative ones, if somebody takes their time to acknowledge the work and say, oh, I like this episode, or even ask a question, it's important to do that. And so then they feel like they are seen, because they just listen to you every week. They have no connection to you, just in you. And then when they type something, you reply them, they feel like they're seen. So when you have live events, they want to come and feel connected to you. And I feel like the more that you focus on the people who already love you, the more you're able to grow your numbers, because they tell people. A lot of people come and say, oh, my friend told me to listen to you. My wife told me to listen to you, you know, and that's how you grow it. But if you think so much about how, oh my God, how do I position myself for the global audience? And now you strip your show down, it's all English, all, you know, now the core fan base that listen to you because of how authentic Kenyan it is or Ghanaian it is, they're now like, I don't recognize this show anymore. And then they don't listen, then the numbers are not being pushed, then you're never gonna get global. You know what I mean? So I don't think we think too much about globalization. It's more like to keep the connection going and keep the fans that we have entertained so much so that they just want to share.
100% agree with that. I have a podcast as well, and half of the time we don't know where the streams are coming from because our numbers on social media is not as big as yours. But when we look at the streams, you're just like, where did this come from? And it's that thing where one person had the podcast shared with another and someone else shares it. And I think there's an importance in meeting the person on the street who says, whether it's for Joseph, I had this word, what does it mean? Or for Mwafreeka being like, okay, I bought you the mic because I heard you saying you need the mic. Or for Tonio, the people who show up and buy your game and all of these things where you're actually in a space where you want to invest in the ideas for the community. And I wanted to ask, because you've all brought it up before I could, what role does your community play in shaping the languages that you use? Like, do you ever feel like you need to change it? Like Joseph has just touched on, is there ever a time where you're like, I wanted to go global just a bit? Have you ever had that moment of just the thought of it? Or how has your community carried you through this language choice, ideally?
So for me, one of the most important things community does for me is feedback, because you can have so many great ideas on what you want to discuss, segments you want to add, but feedback from the people who listen to you is always very important because they are going to tell you whether they dig it or not. You know what I mean? Yes, there was a period, I think, I want to say 2019. There was a period where there were a lot of people, a lot of non-Ghanaians who would, hit us up and say, hey, we listen to your podcast, I really like it, but the local language, if you could just reduce it a bit so we can follow the story, So I remember there was that time and I had a conversation with my producer and I was saying, do we speak more English? Do we cut it out, And I remember we did an episode where I was trying so hard not to, go into the local language too much. And then we got a message from a few fans like, what's going on? You don't want to speak Tree anymore. You don't want to speak, you know what I mean? And I just realized, look, unfortunately, if you're non-Ghanaian, there are going to be instances where you'll be lost. If I listen to any of the podcasts from these guys, I'm definitely going to be a bit lost. But if I care enough, I will find the next, because there are Kenyans in Ghana, I went to school with a couple of them as well. I can easily say, hey, what does this mean? What are they saying? And then just kind of catch on. Because I do that with a Nigerian podcast that I listen to. They have their Nigerian pidgin. They say so many things. I get lost. I ask my Nigerian friends. And for me, I think that's what matters. You are spreading the culture. That's what matters. And I'll go back to the American. We take from them so easily. We learn about their stuff so easily. But anytime they have to learn from us, it's like, oh, I can't pronounce that name, So community is really great for feedback, and also keeps you kind of like informed. There are people who come and say, hey, guys, what do you think? Maybe you guys should interview this person, or hey, don't you want to do video? Because we didn't do video until like 2 years ago. We were like, listen, this is an audio thing. Why do we have to do? We didn't do video. We were like staying away from, and fans came in and were like, hey, everybody's doing, so feedback and suggestions is really great from community.
Yeah, I'd say the same because as I was saying earlier, the way Iko Nini started, because there was a friend of mine called DJ Zach that kept hustling me, like just telling me, start a podcast, start a podcast, start a podcast. So eventually, when the podcast started, we do these videos where you get like a few views. Then I remember there's one fan. I've never forgotten his name because this was interesting. He's called Emmanuel Maragia. Then from nowhere, he's like, "Can you send me your M-Pesa number? I want to send something." So he ended up, and from then we started putting our like a till number on like every show. So I remember he sent 100 shillings, and we were so happy that this person is listening to us, and they've sent 100 shillings. That time, I think 100 shillings was like 80 cents dollar. And with that, we even went to the show and we told people like, "Hey, Nania sent us some money." I don't think we said how much. We just said, "Hey, Nania sent us some money. Like, if you want to send us cash, we'll credit you as the sponsor of the show." And something that started as a joke, people just now started sending money. You'd find like someone has sent maybe let me say it in dollars, someone has sent $30, another person sends 40, 50, other people even over $100. And with that, you credit like the show. You're like, instead of saying this show is sponsored by Coca-Cola, I'll say this episode is sponsored by Gathoni. And then I come up with like a tagline around that. And we found that brought a community around us. Like there are these people who just love Iko Nini. And then I think like one of those wow moments for me was when a fan in the diaspora joined in. And when he joined in, he used the phrase that we use whenever we get a critic that's just mean, we are mean back. We are like we don't care. This is a podcast. This is not a radio station. If you're mean, we are going to be mean. So there's a term that we use. I'm not going to use it here. And this fan joins in and he says that term like, "Hey, you need to make t-shirts with that." And we talked to him, and he's like, "I'm 52 years old." And I look like, if someone who's 52 years old loves the way we speak, why would we ever change the way we speak? Because now we know there's a community. But then it got even more interesting. This guy who's 52 said he learned about Iko Nini from an older woman who's 70, who they met in America, and she was there, just kept telling him, "Iko Nini, Iko Nini," and he's like, "Why do you keep saying that?" He was like, "There's this podcast from Kenya called Iko Nini." Then he went to check it out. So you can look at that, like the age gap, the age what, and you just notice that at the end of the day, it's about authenticity and it's about a certain community, even if it's very small, connecting with you and feeling like you are good. Like if you look at the biggest podcast in Kenya, at some point, it was Andrew Kibe. And the reason why people loved him was also the same thing. The fact that they felt this guy can always speak his mind. He's never going to, he's never going to stop speaking his mind just to make money, because he's afraid of offending some corporate organization or what. So I feel like that community thing, people relating to you and people feeling that they're part of the podcast is more important than you trying to like spread your wings, go all over the world, because cultural differences also mean that you'll never be able to grab everyone. There is someone who in their culture, maybe let's say Gathoni, you're not supposed to expose your hair, so the minute they see you, they're like, "Why is her hair exposed?" And you can't change them. So you know that that's not my audience, this is my audience. And if you find an audience also, I always feel like it's a privilege to, like, in this space of millions and millions of creators, if you have even 5 people who follow you religiously, you should respect that and try and give them quality. So, like, even let me use that opportunity to shout out a few people. As I said, there's someone called Emmanuel Maragia. There's another one called Martin Omedo. Another one was called Chris Mogo, Steve Okeno. These people made us into the podcast we are today. Because someone sends you money, you're like, "What?" Because I sat down and just told you my opinion on something, and I'm not even an expert. I was just giving you my opinion as some random Kenyan somewhere. So I feel like that's so powerful. We ended up like making friends who are friends for life. There's another one who's even met my kids. She's called Sheila. She's based in the US. Just through the podcast, she watched the Winnie Odinga podcast, and we became like, she knows everyone in my family, and just through the podcast. Another one who got lost and into a silent patron. I hope he's safe out there. But this is what a community does, where you feel like I know these people and I've never met them. Like, there are people who have mentioned who, if I met them on the street, I would not know them. But the impact that they did when we had less than 1,000 subscribers, when we had 1,000 subscribers, when you have, that stays with you, and it stays with you, and it pushes you to put out like more quality content. Yeah.
Very true. Tonio, to you now on community. I know you touched a bit on it earlier, but do you have anything to add?
Basically, our community is everything, because without them, we're not talking to anyone then if they're not there. So one thing about our community is they'll be there, and even they feel like there's so much with you guys. They feel like there's so much, they relate to you, and they're just like you. So every time we even do something that pisses them off, you'll see how angry someone is, and you're like, I see, I'm just I'm just doing this, I'm just talking, like I'm not. That's how serious you see people are invested in what you do, because they like they could tell you, man, this was, by the way, this was, or this was good, you see. So another thing is they'll always be there, and when we do a show, for example, they'll always be available to come. They'll even not do whatever they planned on that day. They will save the date and they will come, because they really, this is now the opportunity they have to link up with you. That's why the shows, live shows, and like such kind of events are really gonna be it, because if you can get them online, it means even on ground you can have them. So I really feel like they're really important.
Amazing. I want to thank you all for making the time to be here. Thank you first for creating your podcasts. Thank you for being here to celebrate Africa Podcast Day with us. As a last question, it's not really a question. I want you to let us know where we can find you. And I want you, because your slang podcast, to give us one phrase that you want anyone listening to learn. You don't have to give them the meaning. They can figure it out. Joseph said, go ask your friend who's from the country. So I want you to think of one phrase in your local language slang that you would give someone. So let us know where we can find you, your podcast, and then one phrase. Please keep it PG, on YouTube, family show.
Yeah, the show is Sincerely Accra. Um, just like signing out on a letter, Sincerely Accra. We're everywhere, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you listen to podcasts. We come out every 2 weeks on Monday. You can follow us on all social media at Sincerely Accra as well. I wanted to find out what Iko Nini means. So I feel like it's a question, right? So you can tell me.
Yeah.
But my phrase is a tree phrase that's "Ukoho koyedeng." Ukoho koyedeng. So if you're listening, you can go and ask any Ghanaian "Ukoho koyedeng." Yeah. So that's it.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay, yeah.
We don't know what's happening, but we're going to find the Ghanaian. Yeah, Mwafreeka, I'll come to you next. First explain Iko Nini, and then tell us where we can find you and your friend.
So Iko Nini. So we said it. We say it with what's it called? Like we put some funny pronunciation to it, where it's Iko Nini, but we say it Iko Nini, just to give it some flavor. So Iko Nini podcast is also available on all platforms. So that means Spotify, Google, Apple, and we're also, of course, on YouTube. YouTube is our main avenue because YouTube is monetized. The rest we're doing them for Jesus, so it's just free stuff. Because Spotify is not monetized in Africa, I think, for African podcasts. So I'd say the phrase to learn would actually be ekonene, because for someone like Joseph, for example, it's like if you're to come to Kenya and you're talking to someone and you want to tell them your opinion, whether they like it or not, you put the ekonene at the end. So you can go to a hotel and tell them, yeah, this hotel service is garbage, ekonene. Like I said what I said. So it's a question and it's also a statement. It's something you say at the end of the statement. Ekonene. So yeah, that's what I'd want you to learn. Like if you listen to Kenyan politicians, you'll hear them say ekonene. They always add kwani, which messes it up. But yes, you'll find them saying ekonene. Sonko has said it. Yeah, a lot of politicians have said ekonene. Yeah.
Okay, for me, you can find me, my personal account at Tonio Kibbs, everywhere, and you'll find out that I'm doing a lot of things because I'm also on radio, breakfast show at Homeboys Radio. So yeah, you'll just find that I do a lot of things aside from being in a podcast. So also my podcast is the Sandwich Podcast. So I know that name Sandwich, we were also thinking about it before it became the name, but we were like, let's go with it. So yeah, Sandwich Podcast, and you'll find us everywhere at the Sandwich Podcast. So for my phrase now, my phrase is cheza kama wewe. So cheza kama wewe, it's a Kenyan thing. When you want someone to do something you want or something, you'll be like cheza kama wewe, ama if I'm supposed to give you some cash, it's cheza kama wewe. So that's the phrase I'm living today.
Amazing. Thank you for making the time. You can find the podcasts, Sincerely Accra and Sandwich on AfriPods as well. Let's go AfriPods. Iko Nini, I hope you add it soon. No pressure.
Okay,
But
okay.
yeah, thank you guys so much for making the time.
We are open.
Thank you guys so much for making the time to be here. Happy Africa Podcast Day for everyone joining us. Keep it here for everything else that we have planned. Cool. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
people.